400 planes took off into the Pacific sky, and only a handful ever returned. June 19th, 1944 was not just a battle, it was the day the sky itself rewrote the rules of war. Most Americans remember Pearl Harbor, but almost no one remembers the 2 days when Japan's air arm was annihilated. If Pearl Harbor marked the dawn of the Zero, what ended its reign in just 48 hours? David Harrington knew this machine was different. The stubby Wildcat he once flew had felt like a compromise, underpowered, undergunned out, turned by the Zero at every turn. But this was a Hellcat. 6 50 caliber Brownings in its wings, an armored cockpit that could take punishment and keep him alive. And behind that steel nose, the growl of a Pratt & Whitney R2800 spitting out 2,000 horsepower like a chained beast straining to break free. This wasn't a dancer, this was a brawler. And Harrington knew finally he had a fighting chance. He wasn't alone. Beside him, Ortiz, the kid with only 2 combat flights, but nerves like steel. Above him in command, Dalton, the survivor of Guadalcanal, who had cheated death in burning skies. And over them all, Walter Green, the veteran of Midway, who had seen carriers sink and friends burn, and had sworn that this time would be different. Only 3 years earlier, the sky had belonged to the Zero. Sleek, fast, impossibly agile. It could outturn anything America put up. It climbed faster, struck harder, and seemed untouchable. At Pearl Harbor, at Wake at the Coral Sea, the Zero carved its legend in fire. The Wildcat fought back, but only barely. Underpowered, no armor, no self-sealing tanks. Every turn against a Zero was suicide. American pilots learned one desperate trick dive fire and pray you could claw away before the Zero snapped onto your tie. Losses mounted not just machines, but men. Young pilots with weeks of training devoured in minutes. The lesson was brutal, but clear. If America wanted to survive, the Pacific courage wasn't enough. It needed a weapon. Mitsubishi A6M-0. Speed 331 mph. Range 1930 miles. No armor, no self-sealing tanks. Turn radius unmatched. Grumman F4F Wildcat. Speed 330 mph. Range 770 miles. Thin armor, limited guns. Clumsy in a turn. Grumman F6F Hellcat. Speed 380 mph. Range 090 miles. Armored cockpit self-sealing tanks. 650 cal machine guns. Dive and climb dominance. From these lessons written in blood, the Hellcat was born. Not to outturn the Zero, but to outclimb it, outdive it, outlast it. The Wildcat was a stopgap. The Hellcat was destiny. The stage was set in the Marianas. Tiny islands scattered across the Pacific, but priceless in value. Whoever held them would hold the key to Tokyo itself. From these runways, the new B-29 superfortress could strike Japan's heartland. Task Force 58 was the blade that would seize them. 7 fleet carriers, 8 light carriers, 15 battleships and cruisers, dozens of destroyers, nearly 900 aircraft, most of them Hellcats. A modular war machine divided into groups 58.1 through 58.4, each bristling with steel and fire. At its core, radar eyes, fighter direction centers guiding combat air patrol in layered screens, early warning, precise interception. The system Japan lacked. Across the Philippine Sea, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa gathered his own storm. 9 carriers, 400 aircraft on deck, and from Guam Rota, Tinian Yap, 300 more land-based planes. But numbers alone meant nothing. Many of Ozawa's pilots were boys, barely 50 hours in the cockpit, fragile machines in fragile hands, facing veterans with training radar and industry at their backs. Tomorrow, everything would be tested. The myth of the Zero, the future of Japan's carrier fleet, the very survival of America's advance across the Pacific. Harrington could feel it in his bones. This was not 1942 anymore. This was a new war. And by sunrise, the legend of the Zero would face its reckoning. The warning came before dawn. Contacts, dozens, then scores, then hundreds. From the CIC fighter direction officers drew lines on glowing screens, carving the sky into killing zones. Combat air patrol was split into layers, 1 group high, 1 mid, 1 low. The goal was simple: intercept the Japanese long before they reached the fleet. For the first time in the Pacific War, America had what Japan did not radar eyes: fighter control and discipline. The first wave came in tight formations: Zeros, Vals, Judies. Hellcats dove from above, hit once, and pulled away. Boom and zoom, exactly as trained. The Zero tried to drag them into turning fights, but at high speeds, its controls froze. Against the Hellcat's raw power, the dance was useless. Discipline mattered. Where once Wildcats fought alone, now Hellcats fought in pairs and divisions. One attacked another covered. Radar directed them. Training bound them. Don't turn with a Zero. It wasn't agility that decided this battle. It was system over instinct, and the system was American. The third and fourth waves never even reached the fleet. Young Japanese pilots, many with less than 50 hours of flight, broke formation at the first strike. Dive bombers scattered torpedo planes panicked. One by one, they were cut down before they ever saw an American ship. By noon, the Philippine Sea was littered with wreckage, burning fuel-broken wings oil slicks stretching for miles. 395 Force 02 Japanese aircraft destroyed June 19th. U.S. air combat losses 20 to 30. It was slaughter, the Marianas Turkey Shoot. But not all the killing happened in the sky. Beneath the waves, American submarines struck. USS Albacore put a torpedo into Taiho, the pride of Japan's carrier fleet. Mishandled damage control turned fumes into fire, and by afternoon, the giant was gone. USS Kavala hit Shokaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor and Coral Sea. Explosions ripped her apart. She too sank beneath the sea. In a single day, Japan lost not only hundreds of aircraft, but 2 of its carrier flagships. The head of Ozawa's fleet had been cut off. The reckoning was no longer coming. It had begun. By sunset, the sky was empty. 4 waves had come. 4 waves had died. Nearly 400 Japanese aircraft lost. America barely 30. On the surface, oil fires still burned. Survivors clung to rafts. And in the night, American carriers lit their decks, risking exposure to guide exhausted pilots home. Harrington climbed out of his Hellcat legs trembling. The smell of cordite and burned oil still clung to him. Around him, men laughed, dazed alive. Day 1 was over. The Zero's myth lay shattered. But the battle for the Marianas was not yet finished. Tomorrow, the hunters would become the hunted. June 20th. The Japanese fleet was retreating west. Admiral Spruance faced a brutal choice: stay back to shield the Saipan landings or gamble Task Force 58 in a long-range pursuit. Mitcher pressed the case. Strike now, finish what had begun yesterday. The Zero was broken, the pilots raw, their carriers were bleeding. One more blow could cripple Japan's air arm forever. Spruance weighed caution against opportunity, then gave the order. Task Force 58 turned west, engines roaring steel monsters surging into the Philippine Sea. It was a strike born of desperation and precision. Hundreds of American planes launched at extreme range, their tanks already near empty. They found the Japanese fleet fleeing west, and in the chaos, one carrier, the Hio, became the target. Bombs smashed through her deck. Torpedoes ripped her hull. In minutes, the proud carrier was a blaze smoke curling into the heavens. By nightfall, she slipped beneath the waves. It was a knife into the last lung of Japan's carrier force. The strike had hit, but the danger was far from over. The distance was brutal. By the time the American planes turned home, their tanks were dry. One by one, fuel gauges hit zero. Some ditched into the sea, others prayed for a deck. And then something almost unthinkable. Admiral Mitcher gave the order, turn on the lights. Across the darkened Pacific, American carriers lit their decks like floating cities' beacons to guide their boys home. They lost planes, dozens fell into the sea out of fuel. But they saved the men, and that mattered most. By the end of 2 days, the verdict was absolute. Japan had lost 3 carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, Hio, between 500 and 600 aircraft, and with them, the last of its veteran air crews. The United States lost 123 planes, but most from fuel exhaustion, not enemy fire. The truth was undeniable. Japan's carrier force was finished, not bruised, not weakened, but erased as an effective weapon. The skies over the Pacific no longer belonged to the Zero. They belonged to the Hellcat, and to the system that built, trained, and sustained it. This was not just the victory of a fighter plane, it was the victory of a system, radar and fighter direction, discipline in the air, training that turned rookies into killers, logistics that delivered fuel bullets and spare parts to the middle of the ocean, and above all, industry. American factories could build thousands of Hellcats a month. Japan, barely a few hundred planes in the same time. On one side, an ecosystem, on the other, a myth. By the war's end, the Hellcat had claimed over 5,000 enemy aircraft. Its kill ratio, 19-1, remains one of the most staggering in aviation history. But the numbers are only part of the story. The real legacy was proof that in modern war systems matter more than legends. Factories beat aces, training beat instinct, adaptation beat myth. The Zero began the war as a phantom. By June 1944, it was a relic. From the Marianas, the B-29s would rise, carrying the war to Japan's very heart. That was the meaning of these islands. That was the meaning of the Turkey Shoot. The Hellcat was not a miracle machine. It was something greater, a symbol of adaptation, of steel of a nation that learned, adjusted, and built its way to supremacy. The myth of the Zero ended here. The future belonged to the system, and the system was unstoppable,